Truth and consequence. A message of hope and inspiration misunderstood through the parallels of the English language. I stood up among my brown-skinned family and community members, delivering a passionate monologue pleading for the madness to stop. I proposed tough questions and spoke of the brutal tribal truth that had broken my heart and made me second-guess my very own eyes. I spoke from my heart, the passages of my ancestors, as my soul is made up of the spirit of who we used to be. The onlookers yelled and called me irrevocable names. Some threw food and water at me in disgust at what I had revealed. Defeated by the bullying, I left the teepee with my head hung low, wishing I had never opened my big mouth. I turned to the right and gazed up to a hill where I could seek sanctuary. My body numb from the verbal beating, I ascended towards the outhouse to be alone with my heavy thoughts. Slouched, saddened, and with an immense chip on my shoulder, I arrived, only to find out I was not alone. I barely lifted my head to see who was there. I was not surprised to see a random group of spectators staring at me with their bullying brawn, standing by the stench of that decrepit wooden shed. I believe they were shaming me with their disappointed brown eyes. I felt like a frog trapped in a net. I made eye contact with the chief, blinked to hold back my tears, then bowed my head with shame. Long strands of hair covered my eyes, like theater stage curtains closing the show. I also had 2 braids clinging to my flowing hair, one on each side of the temple. These braids were my special way to pay homage to my culture. I proudly wrapped each braid with a red ribbon in a crisscross pattern with care, just as my grandmother used to show me. I entered the wooded stall, grateful to be alone despite being locked in a tomb of human waste. I sat down amidst the fiery stench and circus of flies, only to realize I had confined myself in a dark prison of fecal regret. Somehow, I felt safe amidst the natural excretions that were also rejected by my community. Even though I was finally alone, the odor was wicked enough to convince me to leave without delay. I swung the door open, hoping everyone had disappeared, but to my dismay, I was greeted by the same set of onlookers. But one man stood out among the crowd. He approached me calmly, walking softly on Mother Earth. It was the chief, by work and by nature. He addressed me by my Indian name and told me that he would like to escort me to the community council. He explained that the community was holding a meeting to discuss my speech and everyone was invited. With doubt in my heart, I meekly accepted his offer to walk me down the hill. I felt as though I was being escorted to the execution wall to await my terminal fate. We arrived at the same teepee where I had received my first tongue lashing. As I entered the door flap from the east, my knees locked from stage fright. I stood silently still. I surveyed the crowd. Palpitations sent messages of fear to my brain. Mostly everyone was judging me with their glaring eyes. The chief took my hand. We turned left and steadily circled the perimeter of the crowd until we approached the north side. Even when our community has a row, we always make sure to honor our sacred teachings of the 4 directions by walking clockwise around the sacred fire that was in the center of our teepee. The head of the Warrior Society asked me to remain standing to await the community reaction. The warrior silenced the crowd by extending his arms straight out in front of him. He then bent at the elbows by raising his hands towards the sky. Palms facing down, he lowered his arms reminiscent of a drawbridge connecting a passage for those wanting to reach the other side. Everyone sat down immediately. My face turned apple red from the panic as sweat dripped like discarded peels falling to the floor. Despite my unraveling, I felt as light as a fleeting feather, ready to fly away in a stolen moment. The adrenaline raced through my arms. I took a deep breath through my nose and out through my mouth in preparation of this mounting attack. I lifted my head high. I had nothing left to lose. I focused my eyes towards the back of the teepee to avoid the hate steaming from the crowd. My fixated glare unveiled a shadowy face that morphed from the suede lining of the teepee. Him. It was the middle of 3 ancestors who graced me with their presence through spirit. I have 3 spirit guides who have watched over me since I was just 3 years old. We experience stories together, a real-time adventure while I sleep. They love me despite my being a half-breed. Always seeking acceptance and approval from more than one culture is like attempting to live in balance between Death Valley and the North Pole. A polarizing experience nonetheless. It's a caged existence in a free world. Without my ancestors, I am nothing but a bag of bones. I am deeply connected with the spirit world only because I have mistakenly visited a couple of times. Regardless of the conflict that has bullied my life, never has one of the spirit guides ever shown his face. Surprised by the emergence of the middle ancestor's appearance, my eyes squinted in hopes of deciphering the image that appeared at the back of the teepee. The spirit's face winked at me with reassuring eyes. I cracked a small smile from the left side of my chapped lips and took another deep breath while searching for the courage through my bloodlines once again. I was not alone. Instantly, a gust of wind blew insults through my hair from the very people who had once again launched their complaints. Half-breed, liar, drunk apple. I cannot deny their stinging words were lemon juice to my eyes, but I held back the tears and stood my ground. A shadow of a man stood tall and accused me of creating trouble. He took an extreme stance against my truth and seemed to be leading this hazing. I didn't realize who he was until he walked up to the fire, ready to shine light on his dark demeanor. The sacred fire sparked light on the growing silhouette and revealed the stranger's identity through the flicker of the flame. It was my estranged father. Dad? A man who never loved me back. Although he was an accomplished man, lobbying for the rights of our people, he had dishonored the sacred bond between a father and a daughter. Our strained relationship had a pitted history hard to digest. Only a sacred few knew what had really happened to me, but it was not my story to tell out loud. Not quite yet, nor was it the time to single out the only father I had grown to love and admire, despite his unforgivable mistakes. The chief warned the unruly caucus not to speak all at once. That was not the Indian way. He took a step closer to me and winked at me with reassuring eyes. Reaching for my trembling fingers, we joined hands in unity. His calloused fingers gripped my frail trust. For a moment there, I wished he was my father. He took his eagle staff and pounded it twice on the floor. The vibration of his interruption silenced the crowd immediately. Even the insects stopped dead in their tracks. It was his presence that sent shivers down my spine. His willingness to support me unconditionally made me feel special again. I had no idea what he could possibly say to convince our community to let go of the hurt. The chief addressed our people. I never thought I would see the day our eyes would be so close to someone who shares the same blood as our own. This is Cedar Woman, and her purpose in life is to speak from the heart. She is an old soul in a young body. We all know this. Her spirit embraces the teachings of the great cedar trees to ground herself on the great red road. Our ancestors communicate through her because her heart has not been tainted by the modern world. Despite the trauma she has suffered, her spirit will always live on. She must be allowed to speak the message of motivation and truth, or we will lose this valuable lesson. Please do not judge the perception of reality. Judge her good intentions to make this world a better place. She has a sacred gift that empowers her to live in balance between two cultures that have already collided. Our Indian blood is being diluted by the great Creator in order to protect the full-blood teachings. It is the time of the half-breeds, whether we accept her or not. We have allies we can trust now because they are our children, rainbow children. I know this is hard to believe, taking into account the mass destruction since 1492. But she is the child of someone who is full blood and very well known to us. Consider this. She is half white blood in order to right all the wrongs. She is half red blood in order to overcome the adversity and shine. When did we become so filled with hate towards one of our own? She is not here to dampen your spirits. She loves her community. I know what she had said may have hurt you. If you were truly offended by her plea, then maybe you are under the very influence and evil that has plagued our communities. Everyone hung their head in acceptance of his words. I would listen to what the great Cedar Woman has to say, because her purpose is to create positive change. She must overcome the racial barriers to do so. Her words are her medicine, a message from the yesteryears. If we ignore them, our people will diminish. If you condemn this half-breed, you will be condemning the will of our great Creator. Her loyalties are to the truth. The chief gently released my hand, raised his staff, and told the council members to mark this day, because it is one of deep understanding and self-reflection. Forgive her. However, my ancestors were not convinced, and their power of silence turned into a ghostly uprising of malcontent. As everyone stood for a prayer, we all joined hands in unity. Once the prayer began, I felt a waterfall grow inside my heart. I felt the power of the water well up in my arms and legs. Instantly, my face was thrust towards the sky. Possessed, my eyesight pierced the opening of the teepee where smoke escaped. The uncontrollable tears streamed down my face like angry, raging rivers. I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. The waterfall inside continued to swell, steadily expanding, ready to burst. My ancestors' lament spiraled into uncontrollable force not to be reckoned with. My entire body became engulfed with the vigor of falling water smashing against the rocks. The tsunami had arrived. Without warning, the oceanic waves exploded through my eyes and ears, resembling a geyser of epic proportions. My fingernails and toenails became projectile darts piercing the hide of the tenting. My hair tussled like flailing fire hoses releasing at the highest pressure. Water was impelled forward from my mouth, vomiting distress. My skin was tearing like tissue trying to hold back the supernatural hurricane. I became a human tidal wave with one purpose only. Bones tore through my skin, broken then crushed. Ribs pierced my torso, then handcuffed my father to the lining of the teepee and caged him inside, jailing him to his fate. My bag of bones disintegrated. My clothes were the only proof that a human once stood there. The spectators were thrown to the exits to escape instant death. As everyone sought refuge on the top of the hill, they watched the water flood the hollow that had once lodged their massive teepee. The aquatic mystery rose up to the level of the people, took hold of their perimeter, and stood its ground. The ripples of the destructive tide calmed down immediately, leaving no traces of a gathering behind. In the middle of this majestic watering hole grew a beautiful red cedar tree that towered over the neighboring forest. The chief held his people back from the edges of this newfound lake. One of the elders who had witnessed the entire transformation noticed a circular object floating on the surface of the watershed.
Over there.
She yelled and pointed towards the item for someone to retrieve it. 3 strong lads used a fallen tree and managed to pull the basket towards the elder so she could save it from drowning. The elder scooped up the woven cedar basket from the lake and cradled it in her right arm. She pulled a necklace from the basket. The necklace had a medicine pouch hanging from the bottom and was carefully branded with the Cree syllabics, which translates into the word love. It looked as if it had been worn for a lifetime. It definitely belonged to someone in the area. As she gave the necklace to the chief, she pulled out the second item that had survived. It was a baby moccasin. The leather had faded on the bottom of the foot. Even some of the fur that laced the ankle had been torn off. It was reminiscent of a baby's first booty. Still, no answers to where these items had come from. Lastly, she pulled out one of the braids of Cedar Woman. It was wrapped with a red ribbon, crisscrossed with care to hold the braid formation tightly so that the hair would last forever. The elder passed the moccasin and the braid to the chief, hoping he would have a clue as to why these sacred objects would be floating mysteriously after Cedar Woman had burst into a lake. Quickly, the chief called out for Cedar Woman's father, but there was no answer. Others shouted his English name, hoping he would answer, but he was nowhere to be found. The chief looked back towards his hands, and he pondered with great wisdom. He looked up at the great cedar tree that hung mournfully with drooping branches. He summoned his canoe and asked the elder and the young lad to accompany him to the great cedar tree. They embarked. With every paddle stroke, a deafening silence took over. An overwhelming sense of sadness had overcome these 3 paddlers. They pulled their canoe up onto the roots that were strong and binding. As they approached the great wooded wonder, the chief took the necklace and placed it over one of the branches lovingly. Then he presented Cedar Woman's braid to the surrounding water as an offering to her family. The braid submerged in seconds. The chief walked up to the trunk of the tree, knelt down on his arthritic knees, and gently laid the baby moccasin on the stem of the tree where the roots were intertwined. He caressed the woven roots as though he were holding Cedar Woman's hand again, soothing her sadness. The chief whispered with compassion, "Cedar Woman, your father, he did love you." He bowed his head in respect for the trees weeping, and relinquished a tear. In slow motion, the tear twirled in the wind and landed on the roots. The chief remained attached to the roots for as long as he could to comfort Cedar Woman for the last time. Eventually, the young lad walked over and helped the chief up from his sacred stance. He looked over to the elder, and she winked at him with reassuring eyes. They got back into their canoe and paddled over towards the crowd. Slowly, the sadness started to lift, and the purpose of those heartfelt items became crystal clear. The tree stiffened its branches and stood tall, almost scraping the sky with its evergreen bloom. As they pulled the canoe up onto the sandy edges, the crowd gathered. The chief addressed them with his staff raised in the air as the entire tribe held their breath in anticipation. The chief declared, "From this point on, we will call this sacred site Crystal Lake. It's named after the great cedar woman who spoke truthfully from the heart. We honor her waterfall and will protect the great cedar tree from this point on. Live on with the forgiveness to heal, the compassion for Mother Earth, and the courage to speak from the heart."